Deutschland. I'm Michael Fastnacht, and I have the fortune to have two amazing jobs. One is the interim CEO and president of World Business Chicago, and secondly, as the first ever chief marketing officer for the great city of Chicago. And thereby the pleasure having two bosses with the mayor, Lori Lightfoot, and our vice chair of World Business Chicago, Melody Hobson. I'm thrilled that you're all joining this morning for this exciting panel. World Business Chicago is really in the business of helping companies here in Chicago to thrive and explaining why Chicago is a great place to start and continue your business for firms in North America and all over the globe, including my home country, Germany. We're also excited that we are ready to launch a cybersecurity pathway program, a partnership with Manuel Jackson of Evanston Technology. It will enhance our position as a hub for cybersecurity, tech talent, and addresses a critical business need to the cybersecurity tech workforce. And as we all know, cybersecurity is an urgent need that we need to address, more important every single day. And Chicago, I think, is well positioned to be a global leader in cybersecurity. Over the last years, we have been recognized as the #1 for foreign direct investment. We have over 200 Germany-based companies in the areas with over 500 locations. Our great German-American Chamber of Commerce is super active and been a great partner for us in our ecosystem here in Chicago. We are not just only the third largest city in North America, but we have some amazing advantages in regards to cost of living, and especially in regards to our tech talent and all the universities around in Chicago and around Chicago. We also have the most connected airport in North America and the third most globally. And there's, as I know really well, great many flights back to one of my favorite cities in the world, Frankfurt. Tech for us in Chicago is our fastest growing segment. It employs almost 150,000 workers with more than 4,000 digital companies here in Chicago. We rank #3 as one of the best global tech cities to work and to start your business. MXD is the National Center for Cybersecurity in Manufacturing and focuses on 3 things. Das factory floor is a demonstration area for existing cybersecurity technology. Second, it works to develop new tools to address its very specific and important need for manufacturers. And third, it works with industry partners and government leaders to figure out how can we get these tools to small and medium-sized manufacturers. Ergon National Labs houses the cyber operations, analysis, and research section of the Global Security Science Department of the lab. As we all know, it's an amazing hub for brilliant innovation. This department of the lab at the intersection of cybersecurity, infrastructure, energy, manufacturing, and the growing area of the Internet of Things. World Business Chicago is proud that we're leading this effort of launching the Cybersecurity Pathway Program to enhance our position as a hub for cybersecurity and tech talent, addresses a critical business need. And now it's my true pleasure to welcome Ute Richter, the Managing Director for Germany's National Cybersecurity Hub at the Digital Cybersecurity, to share her welcoming remarks. Guten Morgen, Ute, und die Plattform ist deins.
Dankeschön. Thank you very much, Michael. So thank you very much for kicking off with us this very first kind of exchange between Chicago and Darmstadt. Now, for all of you who are wondering where the hell is Darmstadt, I can hopefully enlighten you in the next couple of minutes, and also refer a little bit to the relevance of Darmstadt within the European cybersecurity landscape. So we're part of the so-called metropolitan Frankfurt Rhine-Main area. Frankfurt, Michael already mentioned, being one of Europe's largest airports, and is usually quite well known for everybody. And this Rhine-Main Frankfurt metropolitan area is one of the largest areas which we actually have from economic figures. So it's one of the most strongest economic areas. And for this, it is a very interesting location for many cybersecurity companies, tech companies, cybersecurity startups to kind of choose their headquarters here. We're also kind of part as the digital hub of cybersecurity in Germany. We're in a national initiative, something the German government has kicked off in order to facilitate the digitalization of the economy. And there are 16 hubs in total with different areas, kind of overall kind of topics such as AI or IoT, but also kind of vertical topics such as banking, which is something which is very strong, of course, also in this Frankfurt area. Logistics, mobility, e-health is a big topic. So they've got vertical outreaches. And what we do is basically, as the Digital Hub initiative, is we try to connect startups and companies to relevant players within the ecosystem. The second thing I want to point out to you is, I mentioned earlier, why Darmstadt? So basically Darmstadt, which is in American standards, would not even be a city of its own probably, but would really be very closely associated to Frankfurt. Darmstadt is a scientific hub. And in and around Darmstadt, we have the National Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research at TENE. And that is the largest European cluster for applied cybersecurity. Applied cybersecurity, with its very strong focus on kind of getting things on the ground, getting them into action, putting them into place, is something which is, of course, very interesting, again, for a lot of cyber companies who are trying to conquer the market, but also for tech companies who at one point do encounter that the security proposition that is being asked for and sought for in the European market is oftentimes a little bit different to what is being asked for in the American markets. And that is a dilemma for a lot of companies who actually do come to Europe and are trying to kind of conquer the market, that at the latest point when they are becoming successful, their security concepts are being scrutinized a lot more than they are anticipating. And a lot of discussions are very local, are kind of very regional, are kind of very specific to this area. That is starting from the old GDPR discussion, which I know that in the States you are now familiar enough with, but it also comes down to kind of setting up clouds, the way we handle clouds, privacy topics and so forth. Different concepts, basically, sometimes between the American way of for example, defining privacy to the European way or German way of doing this. Which means that we are also very helpful and very interested in giving companies support in actually understanding the market a little bit better, the needs that occur and the requirements that come. And we're also super interested in getting into the kind of exchange that we're facilitating or kind of actually conducting today between Chicago as a super interesting city kind of for European companies and the Darmstadt Rhine-Main metropolitan area, which hopefully is equally interesting for North American companies that are interested in coming to Europe. With that said, I would be happy kind of to drill down into this a lot more, but I know the stage today should be on our cybersecurity startups. So I'll hand over to Dane. Thank you very much for your attention.
Cool. And morning, Michael, and good afternoon, Ute, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As was mentioned, my name is Dane Smith, and I work for the Polsky and Innovation at the University of Chicago, and I'm privileged to have the opportunity to introduce our distinguished panelists to our guests. They are distributed through Chicago and Germany. If it's okay with you, I'd like to just go ahead and dive right into this because that's really where the content is at, and I think our audience is going to get the most value out of hearing from our panelists. Introduce Christina Kraus, who's founder and chief revenue officer of Meshcloud. Christina, if you'll. Our eperi from Germany.
Hey, Dane. Sorry to interrupt. We're having a little audio difficulty with you.
Scream and you tell me if I go the other direction. So.
That's a good location there. I stay kind of in that space. We can hear you clearly.
at the dilemmas of a virtual life. So Emmanuel Jackson, who's the CEO of Evanston Technology Partners. Emmanuel, are you there? Mr. Brian Fritton, CEO and founder of Havoc Shield. And we'll get started. Things with you. Could you take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about your business?
Was this for me?
Yes.
sorry, okay, I missed that. Yeah, sure. So yeah, we are Meshcloud. We are based in Frankfurt, Germany. So Ute already mentioned a bit about the area here. So what we've done is basically we've built a platform to support large enterprises in their cloud transformation. So really the challenge that these organizations are facing is that they have a lot of plans to build their future in the cloud, to build applications in the cloud, and to really develop new business models and new digital business models. And what we do is that we provide them with a platform that they can build on a secure foundation. So they really have an opportunity to let thousands of development teams work in the cloud and have a secure foundation, a cloud foundation that they can build on, and therefore really bring cloud security into the organizations and into every corner of the organization, actually.
About Evanston Technology Partners, would you please?
Absolutely. Good morning to everyone. I guess this is afternoon in Germany, so good afternoon to you all. Evanston Technology Partners is a cybersecurity services company. We are here located on the south side of Chicago. We are proud to represent Chicago and be a part of the ecosystem that is World Business Chicago. We are a cybersecurity services company that specializes in the healthcare sector. More so a deeper dive of that, we specialize in the security of medical devices, IoT devices within the healthcare infrastructure. We have taken a more deeper dive with companies like IBM and Cylara. In a sense, ever since the advent of COVID, we have worked very closely with the Department of Health throughout the United States. And we are building what we consider to be a much stronger cybersecurity posture within the healthcare infrastructure.
How are you today? Could you tell us a little bit about eperi?
Yeah, of course. So there is a simple rule and one takeaway that I would love to give everyone. So the one who encrypts the data has access to the unencrypted data. That's a basic rule in every security. And when we talk about that, because when you encrypt data, that means you're transforming clear text into ciphertext, obviously. And therefore, you need to have access to the clear text. And that's exactly the problem of our customers when they talk about cloud security. And we heard about GDPR, we heard about a lot of other topics in that space. And that's exactly where our customers want to have a secure solution. And that's what our Encryption Gateway provides. It's a proxy solution in the data stream. Encrypting, tokenizing means pseudonymizing the critical data, the PII data, for example, before they are stored in the cloud. And this is the only way how you can use the cloud securely, because you never ever share unencrypted data with any cloud provider, and therefore you comply to every single law in the world that is about data protection. Is it the Driver's Privacy Protection Act in the States, or COPA, or Gramm-Leach-Bliley, or HIPAA, whatever it is, you do comply. Even Chinese cybersecurity laws and others, and companies like, for example, Deutsche Telekom and also Deutsche Bank is using heavily our solution worldwide. And that means you're in control of the encryption process, and that means you're in control of your data.
Yeah, I look forward to learning more about your business, and especially how you came up with the animation with your Zoom background. So I'm sure there's a lot of Zoom envy going on now. So,
of course.
Havoc Shield.
Good morning. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name is Brian Fritton. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Havoc Shield, which is an all-in-one cybersecurity program built specifically for startups and small businesses. We take the sort of ocean of technical compliance, vendor, and especially coordination complexity that is the cybersecurity topic, and we bake it into a step-by-step plan that your existing team can execute on. And we do that by providing a tailored plan, self-service guidance in very plain language, and integrated tools like vulnerability scans, cyber awareness training, email security tools, and the password manager, for example, all without having to leave the platform and find or figure it out themselves. Our customers often hire us to get through the dozens or sometimes hundreds of requirements that large businesses have for them before they can win an enterprise deal. And they use their Havoc Shield program to differentiate them from competitors in that process. So as we're helping customers mitigate, of course, the financial and reputational impacts of a possible breach, we're also actually helping them at this small stage grow revenue through our program. My professional background has been as an engineer, software engineer, and I grew through a few startup CTO and VP of engineering roles before I started Havoc Shield. And I came into the information security industry by way of being the guy that didn't know it, but got stuck with it in small firms in the past, and then having to figure it out on how to support those small companies.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Again, to our panelists, I'm both excited and somewhat frightened to learn about all of the things in the space that you're in that we need to know about. But our audience has obviously found this to be of particular interest. So if okay with you, I'd like to move forward. Maybe Christina, we could talk a little bit about, from your perspective, as you got into this business and where we're at today, what are the things top of mind for you as a founder of a company? What are the things that are most challenging that this audience and your panelists and I need to know about from your perspective in this cyber community?
I mean, what we see is that even though cloud computing is not really new in the market, in the enterprise world, the companies really just start, especially in regulated areas like healthcare or banking, they just start really leveraging the cloud also for productive projects. So they move from like pilot projects where they just start with experimenting into real heavy workload and critical workload that they move to the cloud. And that's why we see like a really large demand in the market for solutions like ours, with which they can basically solve their challenges and really find a way to be compliant to all the regulations and all the security requirements that they have. And that's that's really what we are seeing in the market and the challenges that we see with our customers. And I mean, for ourselves, of course, we are based in Germany right now. We are expanding our business to other countries as well. So that's something we deal with on a continuous basis.
Thank you for that, Christina. And this is really for all the panelists as we go through this. I would appreciate having some sense of how are we doing in the market relative to human resources. You have technical resources that you're obviously working on development. You have financial resources that you're always, as leaders of businesses, concerned about. But let's talk about the human resources. Are you finding the talent that you need out there? Is this an opportunity for growth for people in business and technology who may choose to get into this community? So as we go through this, maybe weave that into the conversation. Elmar, can you hear me okay?
Of course, yes.
Perfect. All right. I feel like I'm screaming, so pardon me if
it's
I
okay.
go overboard.
I couldn't adjust the volume.
Yeah, well, thank you. So similar question for you. What are the key topics of mind for you? What are the things that are keeping you up at night that are most of concern in this cyberspace community that you serve?
So I think the clear regulations that we are missing, I think it's always the same. And in Germany, in Europe, and also in the US, we have a lack of clear rules on how to comply. So when you think about the US, you have a lot of states, and all these states do have different privacy laws. So when I travel through the states, I do have different laws to comply with. And if I have different customers from the states, I do have different laws to comply with. And GDPR does not make it easier in Europe, because we do have similar problems. we don't have a clear justification saying this is how customers are now compliant with all the laws. And companies, when they do worldwide business, they are facing exactly these issues on a worldwide basis. And when it comes to, as you mentioned, people, yeah, we do have, of course, the same problem in cybersecurity than a lot of other companies. We don't find enough talents. We could expand, and the area in Darmstadt is very nice because we have a university and a lot very talented people coming directly from school and very well educated people coming from science also. But nevertheless, it's still not enough, and we need to expand, and on a global basis, it gets much worse. So whenever I talk to my kids telling them how the future will be, I tell them, try to get into information science, because that is the future. We do need much more people, much more well-educated people in different areas there.
That's great news. Thank you very much. Emmanuel.
Yes.
Good morning, sir. You know, you mentioned the Internet of Things, and particularly medical devices, and really the communication networks that are now reaching out to devices that maybe 10 or 20 years ago we didn't think would have an internet address to them. And this is a space that you work in. This is of great interest to me, but it's also somewhat frightening to think that you know, the potential threats that exist in these devices. Maybe you could take a few minutes and talk to us more about that and what you're facing in your business.
Sure, absolutely. But if you don't mind, if I can just address the human resources issue just for 30 seconds.
Yes, please.
You know, here in the United States, especially in Chicago, the greatest issue and threat we have to cybersecurity is a lack of human resources. And it's just not an issue in the United States. It is a global one. Currently, there is probably a gap of 3.2, 3.5 million cybersecurity certified workers that are needed in the actual marketplace. I believe there's probably, you know, 500,000, 600,000 cybersecurity positions open in the United States right now. And the only way that we're going to address it is the way that I'm working with World Business Chicago to do it now. And that is, we have to create talent. A couple of years ago, there was a congressional hearing in Washington, D.C. that made it clear that the best way to fill these positions is with women and underrepresented populations here in the United States. And that part is going to be clear because we really, really need to get on top of it. And of course, also there's a huge wealth transfer that has happened within the cybersecurity breaches. There are almost $10 trillion in damage that has been done to economies globally because of the cybersecurity. Now, you know, the money's going somewhere, right? So in a sense, it has strengthened criminal enterprises around the country, actually globally. As it relates to IoT, that becomes a more interesting play for all of us as we look at the advent of 5G technology and a communication vehicle and a broadband vehicle that greatly expands what you can put onto a network. On a 4G network, you could put maybe 2,000 devices per square mile. In a 5G network, you can put 1 million devices per square mile. And so the strength of that level of communication will give us the ability to have autonomous, you know, driverless cars and other things that we were not able to do. It would strengthen our ability to do surgeries remotely and things like that. You know, your refrigerator will order your groceries. Some of that can do that now, but that does open up billions and upon billions of new items that will go on to our networks with its own IP addresses, and that needs to be secured. And that also expands, and we must expound on the greater need for greater tools, greater coordination, and of course, a need for a very skilled workforce.
Thank you for that, sir. Brian, based off of what Emmanuel was just discussing, you know, any thoughts on the technology that you're producing, that the resources that you're putting together? How, you know, how do we wrap a bow around these challenges? I mean, is it Is it just about recruiting resources, or can we accomplish this through technology? Help me understand this a little better.
Yeah, well, I think first, the partnership here is a great way to do that, is just having the conversation. We live in a world now where many businesses can just as easily be working with customers in Germany as they can be selling to Americans, no matter where they are. And that's obviously not going to change. And I think a lot of the challenges, as Elmar said, are related to, shared incentives and compliance. And as, Emmanuel said, are also related to making sure that you have the people to tackle those problems, which, is not going away, and is the pace of demand for folks who are able to do this job is only increasing. So we have to absolutely tackle those problems. One layer that I think about a lot, and I'm not sure if I can tie this in a bow because it's just a huge topic, but one area that I think about a lot is that, compliance and security are not the same, and that we have to, I think, get better at talking about how they interact, but that, you don't gain security through compliance. And I want to make sure that, as the industry grows and regulations increase, that we're not just sort of checking the box. And, everyone on the call here is building awesome products, providing awesome services to solve both the compliance and security problems. But I fear that there's a space that we might reach in the near future where we're kind of back to just sort of checking the box. And so I think, conversations like this and having experts like the folks on this call in government, in industry, where they're setting those rules is going to be really important to make sure that, even though we're checking the box, we're not still seeing breaches increase. And the other thing that I think is a layer here is that statistically, study over study, small businesses are being breached at the same or similar clip as the large businesses are being attacked. And, these are our largest employer of people in aggregate in pretty much any country. And we've got to, I think, get more proactive about giving these small, under-resourced companies the same level of professionalism and security that we do large businesses. And that's sort of an underserved market and challenge.
Thank you for that. That's a great reminder to just think of the sheer math that's involved with that. I'm sorry, Emmanuel, go ahead.
I would agree with that. Just to add on something, just a little more. I think as we look at small businesses and businesses overall, one of the greatest challenges I see is the level of investment that business is making for cybersecurity. I would assume, I would like to know what the panel thinks, but I'm going to assume that probably cybersecurity is probably funded at 1/3 of what it should be at this current time globally. We see it in healthcare. We see it where, hospitals, because of COVID, have very thin margins, and yet the level of breaches and ransomware has greatly exacerbated. And what COVID has proven is that we have a real issue here with the level of investment that is going into cybersecurity, and that from a government standpoint, from a corporate standpoint, needs to be improved exponentially to keep us all safe.
Right, and it's also very important for all of us, and especially, I guess, for the ones also in this panel here, to make clear what people should do, because it's not only the pure money that is spent somehow and somewhere, it's also about where the money is spent. And when I see that a lot of people are still spending money into the old, trying to old encryption topics and the old technologies, where people are protecting the systems and not being aware that people are carrying away the data somewhere out, and that people are working with their mobile phones and not only with their PCs locked somewhere in the office. That is something where I feel we as a security providers should help to educate also the people outside who are not that deep into all these technology discussions about how to really make sure that data privacy, and I absolutely agree, data privacy is not directly security, but that you are able to have both together, and that a focus onto data security is really there.
Thank you, Elmar. Thank you, Emmanuel. Christina, I'm curious, based off of what Elmar was just saying, the world you know, a year ago was thrown into this remote living, right? So we were all distributed to different locations. We were taken out of the enterprise, or I guess you could think of the enterprise was expanded virtually. Did this make things better or worse?
I think by now it has made things better. Like people, like especially in Germany, where we were still kind of stuck to our offices, and especially in large enterprises, they have really made a huge jump into digital topics, and they were forced to speed up in this area. And I think it was quite a tough. I mean, it was probably a tough year for all of us, but it was especially a tough year for these IT departments that had to cover for like millions of workplaces and really enable them to work remotely and also to ensure security on a remote basis. But as a result, I really believe that we have made a great step forward, and that it will really help us to push the topic even further and to just continue working on digitization on a much better level than we were at in the beginning of past year.
Thank you for that. Brian, I'm curious at Havoc Shield, as we were forced into this virtual environment and redistributed to our home offices and different locations, relative to what Emmanuel was talking about earlier, have you seen an increase in spend? I mean, is it relative to what Christina was just saying? Are companies big and small now forced to go dedicate financial energy towards this?
Yeah, I think the good news is that it is certainly becoming more proactive, but I think it's maybe through the lens of a few scares. And these scares are coming out because, you know, obviously remote is the way that everyone is working right now. And COVID is keeping folks at home quite distracted, right? You know, we've got our kids coming in, the Zoom backgrounds and lots of things going on with family and health and the world. And so, you know, we're all more distracted than otherwise we would be in the office. And that has opened up a pretty gaping hole in the threat vector that is social engineering, right? And so being able to understand and identify, understand how to identify and identify social engineering types of attacks like phishing, for example. And what we're seeing, I think, a little bit of good, little bit of bad, is that, you know, these small and large companies through their employees are getting scares, right? People are clicking on those phishing emails and they're filling out credentials where they shouldn't, and they're not catching the things that maybe otherwise they would in a calmer office environment. And that's creating situations where, hey, maybe it didn't happen that time, but they're seeing an increased volume. And so I think you're seeing businesses going, okay, if that would have gone another way, if we would have clicked that one other link, you know, things could be a lot different today, and financially impactfully so. And so I think people are being more proactive from that because they're seeing their competitors, their industry colleagues, you know, not work out so well.
Thank you. Brian, I'm curious, do you see any change in behavior of the users? I mean, I'm thinking in my own life, there are sometimes I'll see an email or something, and as opposed to just the immediate, you know, hand to mouse click, all of a sudden it starts to feel a little strange, feels a little bit like, you know, someone's really attempting to get me to click on that. And you know, I just feel like in my own life, I'm becoming a little more sensitized, you know, to the possible traps that are being laid for me. And
yeah. I would love to know what the other panelists think about this too. But my perspective on this is, I think we all have a good threshold for the junk, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of junk that's relatively easy now to point out, and we're getting better. We're climbing the ladder pretty slowly, though, still, I think, at being able to identify those types of attacks. But attackers are faster than us, right? It's still just a cat and mouse game, and they always have new tactics that they're using. You know, one good example is, instead of sending you a phishing email with a nefarious looking link in it, they might share you a Google Drive, you know, document or something like that, and go that route. And so they've got lots of new tactics, of which they're going to change all the time because people get used to one thing. And it's going to take some threat intelligence and some careful reading, I think, and community involvement across businesses to stay in front of those types of things, because you can't do it with just posthumous training yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Elmar.
Yep.
So with regard to this topic, let's pretend you had the resources that you needed, human and financial. Where would you double down on your investments? What big bets would you be making over the next 3 to 5 years in the space? And by the way, if I'm stepping on proprietary information that you really don't want to share with the world, feel free to opt out of any of these questions.
No worries. No, I think it's really important to have a global vision onto what we do, and that's also the way to go for eperi, obviously, because when we talk about cloud security, it's not a local problem, and companies are distributing their data really all over the globe, and they are even not in control onto where the data really is in the world, and that makes it so hard to comply on the one side, and also to control everything about who has access to which data, because it's pretty clear. One thing, as I mentioned before, is the cloud provider has access to the unencrypted data. Of course, he has admin access to your data. And even if he encrypts it, he has to have access to the unencrypted data. And that's exactly the big problem. You're out of control of the data who's shared somewhere in the world, and you don't know where it is. So you have to make sure when data flows out of your control that it's really secured by pseudonymization, and that's exactly what eperi offers. And I would guess that internationalization is the way to go for each startup as early as possible to really test the water. And most of the business language is English, so we even don't tap into problems in communicating with other areas.
Thank you. Thank you. Manuel, you and I recently had a conversation, and I said to you, hey, thanks to the great resources, technical and otherwise, from our panelists, I sleep better at night knowing that you all are on the job, right? And you helped me understand that maybe I shouldn't be sleeping as well as I thought I should.
Well, that wasn't a scare tactic, but at the end of the day, we have to understand the interconnectability of a business, of networks. So if you have a SolarWinds breach at the US government, I can assure you that breach affected its partners that it is interconnected with. It did affect its actual vendors. It did affect the privacy and the safety of actually citizens. So if I am a city like Atlanta, who was actually breached, Atlanta does city with the state government. That interconnectability becomes an issue. The federal government has a keen interest when the 9th largest city in the United States gets an actual breach. But my specific conversation with you had to do around things like patient safety. Too often we have a greater issue with patient privacy, which is very important. But the other issue that is I think more critical is patient safety. What can you do with the patient's data once you get it? Can you change pharmacy records? Can you change surgery records? Can you change treatment records? And the answer to those things is simply yes. And so I think that until we get to a place where we are pushing a stronger cybersecurity posture across the world, especially here in the United States, we're going to have issues. I predicted this time last year when we first heard of COVID, is that there would be cyber breaches within healthcare will grow exponentially. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning that talks about that, but it has expanded. It has expanded beyond hospitals. It has expanded to pharmaceuticals and research companies and universities, hospitals that have research companies. And so that has become an issue. Now with that predictability, it's made us some money, right? But none of us are going to be all that successful if our customers are receiving financial damage from cybersecurity breaches.
I was thinking of all of you. Sunday night, 60 Minutes had an episode with regard to the data that we all essentially are thinking of or prone to giving away, our health data, our genetic data, as we volunteer through some of the programs are out there to have our our genetics checked and family histories, and we sign up for, whether it's Ancestry or 23andMe or whatever, and what ends up happening with that data and how we relinquish that data, over to those particular users and how they may use it or may not use it. And of course, then it brought in the idea that there are other state-owned enterprises. I think they were featuring Chinese companies, for instance, that were interested in that data and what they're going to do with it. So again, this is both interesting and frightening to me when I start thinking about how quickly we are to just relinquish this information.
Well, also let me say this and about what Omar does. I think the way that we handle data, where that data moves, people who bring devices, where it's being downloaded, where it's being carried, how it's being transported, and having that data to be encrypted is extremely important. And I think his side of the business is just absolutely critical to, where we go, globally with this thing. And also, I highly suggest that people, keep their eyes on sponsored nation state cybersecurity. It sounds great, but I also would caution people to worry about what's going on inside of their homes, inside of their houses, inside of their companies. And so, the first people that you should protect yourself from is the 10 people to the 40, 50,000 to 100,000 people who works for that company. As I tell my clients, our job as a cybersecurity service provider is to trust no one, not even you.
Absolutely. And I think that's also a very important topic. No one can prevent that data gets stolen. And we are living in a very complex world. Look at that panel. We are talking about IoT. We are talking about healthcare. We are talking about multi-cloud environments. And that's exactly the complexity that has added, and companies can't be under their control of everything as it has been in the 80s, for example. We are talking about Office 365, mail, calendar, Teams chat that recently through that pandemic came up that everyone is, as we are working here with Zoom, others are working with other tools together. They are sharing data across the world with multi-cloud environments, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and and you can't work with the or be in control of everything. So you have to make sure that other ways and thinking about data is exactly the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only a complex environment, it's a very dynamic environment. Things change all the time, and it's very hard to keep track of what is going on. So I think whatever we develop in terms of solutions, of course, I mean, also we integrate a preventive approach to security into our platform, and that's really essential, but we have to have like continuous monitoring included as well to make sure that we really track all the dynamic changes that we are facing in our environments, be it the mobile devices, but also the applications and so on. So we really need to have multiple levels and layers. So we are preventive, but we are continuous as well in terms of what we are monitoring. And then another thing that is really discussed in the banking area here as well, and also when it comes to regulation, is having an exit strategy as well. So that's basically the last plug you can pull to really be able to leave a system and hop onto another one. And are you able to do this based on the processes that you have established? And that's really something that we should always have in mind on how do I handle this dynamic environment, and how do I get out of it if it has to be done?
Thank you, Christina. Christina, I think you mentioned this earlier. I spent some time, a number of years ago in the virtualization space, and we were taking physical devices and moving them as fast as we could to virtual devices. And at that time, we had clients in banking and industry and U.S. government 3-letter intelligence agencies that were creating honeypotting scenarios and attempting to catch the bad guys. I'm curious, as we migrated from physical to virtual and then virtual to the cloud, has this made it more risky? Have we introduced more risk? Have we reduced risk? I mean, there was great debate back in the the middle 2000s of what was going to end up happening. What's happened relative to the cloud?
I mean, what we really have to look at is that the cloud providers have worked a lot on security features as well. So they really put teams that build on features to secure their environments. And of course, we still have some issues, as Elmar mentioned, in terms of, okay, they encrypt the data, but they also have the key. They also provide you with the key to decrypt it. But in terms comparing it to like private data centers, for example, I think we have really risen up a level, and we are much better in terms of capabilities by what the providers offer to us, because they just invest so much more resources into cloud security, and an individual organization wouldn't be able to do that. So they really have some chances in moving to the cloud to also improve their security.
Thank you. Amar, do you have any thoughts on that? Anything that you can wrap?
As mentioned, I guess it's important when you look at who controls the encryption process, and it's not only about the key management. Key management is one side. Even if you have the key and the data, you must control the encryption process, because otherwise, if the encryption is happening in the cloud, attackers from outside have a backdoor to really easily get access to the unencrypted data. And that is exactly what you have to prevent. And this is the only way that you stay in control, and the cloud provider never ever has access to the unencrypted data. And that's the only way to comply from my point of view.
Thank you. Brian, it would seem like maybe you agree with that.
Oh yeah. One thing I think that we have going for us with adoption of the cloud too is it is forcing companies to reevaluate their perimeter. Like Emmanuel said, trust no one. In a different context, I think companies are getting better at, to use a buzzword, but zero trust, right? When it comes to their infrastructure and really how they should envision their perimeter and how that interacts with the public or non-public resources. And I think that by witnessing and seeing that it's not this big strong wall that as long as you're behind, you're safe, I think a lot of people are changing their mental model about how they think about security. And with that, you can do a lot of positive things.
Thank you. Thank you. Emmanuel, we have maybe about 4 or 5 minutes left before I'd like to open it up to audience questions, if that's okay with you. But any thoughts as we begin to kind of go into closure here that are things that we haven't discussed here today that you think are of paramount importance that our audience and your other panelists need to know from your perspective?
Yeah, I would go to a broader aspect, and what would concern me is about the strength of the whole cybersecurity supply chain. So part of that meaning is that we have a disparity in what individual companies can actually afford. And so, you do business with everyone. And so from the government, from healthcare to financial sector, to manufacturing, to defense and security across the world. And what we cannot afford is the issue that we have now is some very weak links in that process. How we could communicate, how we do payments, goods and supplies, and how we transfer information. The security posture is not the same across the board. There are some serious weak links there. And the question is, how do we do that? Of course, one of the services that I provide and the platforms that I provide is actually zero trust. I'm not here to sell that, but the idea is that you can have, huge disparities in what companies can afford. And, there are more government regulations coming down and what those standards could be, or what those standards has to be, and they have to be complied with as it relates to cybersecurity, or in healthcare, there are new regulations for IoT devices and medical devices. Now, the question is, who can afford it?
Yeah.
Where are the resources going to come from globally to secure these overall networks? Now, we live in a competitive global world, right? Germany wants the most secure cybersecurity platforms in the world. And so does the United States, and so does China, and so does parts of Europe and actually Asia. And so you find yourself creating, a cyber stack, if you will, that is not only meant to be defensive, but is also meant to be offensive. And then you have the criminal world, who is quite frankly much better funded than any companies that I know.
Yeah.
Any companies, by far, they're much better funded. And we have to match those level of research dollars and make the investments that actually need to be made.
Thank you for that, sir. Well, let me bring it back before we open up to questions to Darmstadt, to our friends in Germany, and to World Business Chicago and the greater Chicagoland area. If I heard you correctly, and I'm testing my understanding, business is good and we are open for business in those markets. Human resources are important, and this is a great time for Booth students, University of Chicago computer scientists, anyone who has an interest in being in technology in this particular space. There is unmet need for human resources. Is that fair? Is that fair to say in all of your markets? But Emmanuel, I think you may have mentioned this, or Brian, forgive me, I can't remember who it was, that there are tests and certifications. You really have to kind of invest in your education in this space. You can show up and volunteer and pursue these opportunities, but you have to invest in some education in order to become certified in these communities. Is that true?
Yeah, those are the areas that I work in. I have a partnership currently with IBM and their new collar program starting on February 15th. We here in Chicago will start a pre-apprenticeship program for cybersecurity that will lead into a full apprenticeship program, possibly a month and a half later, that will last for 12 months. But we can't wait to produce cybersecurity talent for 12 months. There are people out there and programs and companies who can produce it a lot sooner. So we look to have qualified people on our staff where people who will test into Security Plus at a level 1, but they'll be able to shadow people, and hopefully we can get them to level 2s in a very short period of time through actually simulation and also shadowing. But the idea is that there are certifications out there at many different levels that can be accessed and attained on a real incremental basis. And 6 months to a year, people could attain these jobs and make pretty decent salaries.
That's fantastic. Christina, do you have any final thoughts as we move into opening questions from the audience?
I just want to say that I really loved the discussion, and that it was great to get these insights also from the other members and from the Chicago perspective. I mean, we could only touch the topics on a really high level. I think there's much more potential in digging deeper into certain areas and really bringing together also our expertises. But I believe that we will be able to do so in the future as well, now that we are connected, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Elmar?
I'm absolutely happy, and I'm really curious about the question from the audience, because that's who we want to talk to. So yes. Yeah,
and I have to note, I did notice you changed the background in when you were talking there earlier. So well done. I'm impressed and I'm very envious. So,
that's my challenge.
Yeah, so well done. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, I also want to know what Elmar's doing behind the screens there. That's pretty cool. One thing that's going through my mind is the necessity of simplicity and accessibility in security, right? Like statistically, small businesses are almost as likely, if not just as likely, to get breached as large businesses are. But those small businesses, given what the topic of human resources that we were just talking about, don't have the expertise, can't afford, even if they were available, and oftentimes those specialized skills. And so I think about products as all of us are service providers and product makers, about how we suit our products to those types of users. And a lot of it is, hey, let's remove some jargon, let's make this more accessible, and let's treat the user like a person with a job to do, rather than someone who thinks about security all day long. I think most businesses don't want to install an SIEM and, look at compliance spreadsheets all day. The reason why they're looking at security is because they want to win a big customer, or they don't want to go out of business because they do get attacked, or they know they have to comply with HIPAA or something like that. Those are the real jobs. And so we should treat people, I think, right when we think about building products and make this more accessible and align those incentives.
Thank you for that, Brian. Manuel, maybe you can close this out with some thoughts. And Kyle, if you wouldn't mind coming in, and we can take some questions from the audience after Emmanuel finishes sharing his thoughts.
Well, yeah, to piggyback on what Brian said, I think it is imperative to the industry and service providers to provide customers with what they need and not just what you sell. And so being a service provider ourselves, that's what we specialize in. There's no cookie cutter customer. There's no cookie cutter hospital, financial institution, nor is there a cookie cutter government. We need to be able to listen to our clients. We need to take a global posture to cybersecurity and to that individual, and understanding that they have a job to do. And part of our responsibility is to help them to do that job, because we need to understand if that job is not done well, that affects not just that individual person, it affects people's way of life, their safety, their jobs, how they care for their families. And so we need to take, as Brian put it, a very human approach to this whole process. And I really do agree with that. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Kyle.
Thank you, Dane. Awesome job facilitating this conversation. And to Christina, Elmar, Brian, and Emmanuel, just a tip of the hat and a heartfelt thanks for just your insights into the industry and the threats, the trends, and transformations that are taking place. Now we'd love to open it up for audience questions and help bring kind of some dimension to this conversation. So if you have a question and would like to ask any of our experts, feel free to throw that out there. You'll get a notice that says you're being promoted to a panelist. So we're happy to turn on your cameras and let you speak directly with Dane, Christina, Elmar, Brian, and Emmanuel, and create a little network here as well. Uta, if you'd like to turn your camera on too. And before we do that, before we throw out the questions that are from the audience and kind of some of the networking, I would just like to give a shout out to Dane and the Polsky Center. In the chat box, you'll see an opportunity to connect further with Dane and the Polsky Center on some of their cybersecurity efforts in the coming days.
Thank you, Kyle. It was very kind of you. I appreciate it. And please, for those who might be interested, reach out and attend the event on the 19th. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience, or has this panel done such a phenomenal job in covering the world of cybersecurity that we are good? Okay. Well, excellent. We kept this to a tight hour then. Thank you all for the time this morning and being part of this conversation. And to the panel and Dane, thank you guys. Your insights were spot on and we appreciate it. Oh, Counsel General, do you have a comment, or would you like to make a statement?
Hello, good morning to everybody. I'm Wolfgang Mössinger, the German Consul General here in Chicago. And I just wanted to thank my friends from Darmstadt and Frankfurt to have participated in this panel. And of course, for World Business Chicago to have facilitated it, and to all the panelists who have shared their vast experience and expertise. I hope this is just the beginning of a networking process between our cluster in Darmstadt, and there are other clusters in Germany as well working in a similar field, and of course Chicago. And if we from the Consulate General can help that in any way, please let us know. I put in the chat my email address, and so please feel free to contact us if you see a possibility for us to be in any way helpful to make this happen. So thank you again, and good luck in your very necessary work for all of the companies now. Thank you.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Counsel General. Anyone else who would like to share perspective, engage with the panelists why we still have some time here this morning and in Germany's afternoon?
Kyle, I have one thing at the risk of sounding like an advertiser, but I promise I discovered this recently at the University of Chicago. If you have it, or I can post it up. There was some discussion about tests and certifications for individuals in the industry. And at University of Chicago, we have a machine learning for cybersecurity certificate program that I recently discovered that's under Dr. Nick Feemster, Dr. Chin, and Dr. If you happen to have that, or I can put it in the chat box for those who might be interested.
Dane, I already added to the chat box the overview of the program, and the link to the page are included with that share.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Anything else? Ute, you've been very quiet, though you've been a core piece to this panel discussion. Any words from you this morning, my friend? And not to use a phrase from 2020, but you are on mute.
Yeah, I think that's a never-ending story. Huh? Either on mute or the camera is broken. So thank you very much for having us today. I think it was really, as the Generalkonsul has already pointed out, most interesting kind of to start this discussion. And Christina mentioned this, Elmar mentioned this, so did Brian and Emmanuel. I think there is lots of other areas to discuss. I think it's also very interesting for any company who wants to go either to the North American market or to the European market to kind of participate in these discussions and really drill down, perhaps in our next session, into detailed questions or give us some feedback on interesting areas which they would like to drill down, because I think it does save both sides, the ones going to the North American market as well as the ones coming to the European market, and especially the German market. It does save both sides a lot of time and effort if you have a solid understanding of the necessities of the markets, the requirements, and the, as I pointed out at the beginning, sometimes slightly different perceptions and takes to the security topics overall. So I think, thank you very much for facilitating this.
Thank you, Ute.
And thank you. I think from World Business Chicago's perspective, since the pandemic has started to engulf the globe, it's become apparent that this world is tighter and more interlinked than we probably even realized before last year. And it's not just in one industry, it's all of our industries are together. And so being able to convene a discussion about cybersecurity when so much of our financial and health and personal information are online, and to have the four panelists and Dane's wonderful moderating skills was really helpful. And as Ute said, we look to engage further with these conversations as cybersecurity will continue to be an area of focus for all of our lives. And so if anyone else would like to raise anything, turn their cameras on and share a note, we'd love to hear that, or we're happy to let y'all continue on with your Tuesday, February 2nd.
I do think we'll stay a little bit online. So if people want to just chit in and chat with us, they might just as well do. So I think we will be open to network a little bit if people want to switch on cameras and maybe have questions they want to ask.
Absolutely.
Switching on the camera.
Absolutely. And thank you to our panelists again. Thank you for your service. I think of you, not to take anything away from first responders and other first line service individuals and in uniform services and firefighting and healthcare, but I really do think of you as first line resources, perhaps even in front of the first line. So thank you again for the service that you and your teams are doing.
Yeah, I keep thinking of the conversation we had last week, Dane, where you asked about or you made the statement that you felt secure with this world, and then just the honesty that Elmar, Emmanuel, and Brian brought to the naivete that we live in has stuck with me for the better part of the last 5 days. Every time I look online, I got a notice from Google last night that I was not secure. A couple hours, I was like, oh, damn.